Thanks so much, Kelly. I'm sitting inside here with Chris Green from Augo Studios. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to see you.
Nice to be here.
Now, I've been talking about this all morning. The front page of the Vail Daily, it does say warming may shorten winters. Now, you're an architect. We were speaking a little bit about this earlier. CO2 emissions, of course, connected with climate change. People are very surprised, and you shared this with me earlier, about kind of the source of CO2 emissions. Let's talk a little bit about that first.
Okay, well, I wanted to bring on air a little bit of information because I think there's a public perception that vehicles and that are a major contributor, but in fact, buildings are the most significant contributor to the CO2 emission debate. So when we talk about what we're talking about here, where we can really have the most significant impact is how we address the CO2 emissions of the buildings that we work in, live in, and play in. And so there's a public perception, again, that we really need to kind of shift around and understand that buildings are the most significant contributor to it, and that's why we as architects have a more important role in helping to address what you're talking about.
Now, Chris, this is something I was very surprised about. Of course, buildings don't have an exhaust pipe.
Well, in fact, they do. There is an exhaust pipe. Any gas-fired water heater that you have, any gas-fired furnace or boiler, if you have snow melt that is being fired by a natural gas boiler, it's got an exhaust pipe, and that exhaust pipe feeds CO2 into the atmosphere. So, surprise, surprise, but there are big exhaust pipes coming off of buildings that people just haven't made the connection with.
Now, we do, of course, have a couple slides to take a look at. I'd like to move to our second one. It's U.S. energy consumption.
Right.
This is actually how energy is used. Now, this is a great slide that kind of represents the different areas, especially according to perception. It's so different.
Right. And if you look at that, industry consumes 25%, transportation is 32%, and buildings are 48%. Almost 50% of the energy consumption in the U.S. is through buildings. And as such, and we're significantly higher than transportation. Not that transportation should be taken away from, but when you deal with building a building or designing a home up here, we have a responsibility.
Now, what can we do around here? How are architects working? I know architects are leading the way. You're an architect yourself. Mm-hmm. Tell me about what you guys are doing to decrease CO2 emissions and to really battle this problem.
Well, one of them is getting on the air and having the discussion and beginning to dispel the perception that vehicles are the single most contributor. One of the things I wanted to do today is communicate that we have that responsibility through the buildings we build. But conscious steps. I do a lot of remodel work, and in my remodel works now, I'm starting to ask for energy records, and I'm starting to assess the energy use of those buildings and assess opportunities to reduce the reliance on mechanical means for things like ventilation and lighting. Can we reduce our lighting load by 50%? Do we have opportunities for natural ventilation that eliminate the need for mechanical ventilation techniques? Can we create air shafts through buildings? Can we create operable windows and a skylight that we can open that'll create a natural draft? Can we get deep daylighting into a building, and how do we do that? So these are all techniques. And then when we get into, I've explored with different clients the possibility of geothermal and how that relates to snowmelt. So we need to really pay attention to all of these strategies to begin to really get to a zero energy consumption budget.
Now, we do actually have a chart that shows the different energy emissions that are coming out of buildings versus transportation and everything.
Right.
I want to take a quick look at this. You can actually see. Do you want to move on to the solar? Actually,
let's go to the solar one, because I think that's even that's a more interesting chart, because the quick version of this is the amount of energy that falls, the solar energy that falls on buildings in this country exceeds what we really need to operate the buildings. And the most significant part of that is if we go to Seattle, for instance, even in Seattle, where the humor is that people grow mold on themselves in Seattle, but there's so much clouds and that sort of thing. Even in Seattle, there's enough sunlight that falls on the roof and the facades of the building that we can extract a total building energy budget for a year. So we've got the ability to do it. We just got to get the technology up there to get there. And that's happening too.
Now, speaking of getting the technology, what does the future hold? What are the goals of the AIA, and how are we going to reduce, and I say we as really Americans, going to reduce the energy out, or the CO2 emissions of buildings?
Well, that's a really great question. Thanks for asking that. The AIA is the American Institute of Architects, and they have set up, they have created a 2030 initiative that by the year 2030, all new buildings and all remodels will consume zero energy. So that's the goal. The question is how we get there. What we're doing now is as AIA architects, we're all focused on what this means. What do we have to do to get there? And frankly, it's a tough challenge. And I'm starting to develop the dialogue and beginning to challenge my clients, because here in the Vail Valley and the Eagle River Valley, we have the resources. We have people with the finances and the resources and the intellectual backbone to begin to challenge these problems. There is no silver bullet here. And so what we really need to get to is begin to say, okay, what's it going to take to study the problem, develop strategies, and really look at these. We have to test them a couple of times and then say, let's pull the trigger and get into how we do it. So there's not a silver bullet here, but the good news is that we have the abilities and the intellectual abilities to put the teams together to begin to study the strategies and begin to get there. But what we need to do is begin to get our clients to say, okay, I'm ready to back the effort. I'm ready to put my resources behind the effort and begin to challenge it. And there are some upfront costs to do it, because frankly, zero energy is I mean, what do? You harvest all of your energy on site? That's a good one, but that's one of the realities of what we're looking at.
Now, Chris, clearly you're very passionate about this issue. If someone's watching and they just want to get in touch with you, talk to you a little bit about it, ask some more questions, how do they get in touch with you?
You can give me a call. My studio phone is 970-748-9474. You can also reach me at www.agostudios.com, and my email address is chris@agostudios.com. So I'd be glad to discuss this further, and would really welcome the challenge to put a team together to really see what we can do up here and begin to have a leadership role in a resort community in this kind of deal.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Likewise.
Chris Green is the architect at Ago Studios. Be sure to visit his website. You can also check more out about him on plumtv.com. Click right on Vail and you can see a piece about Chris. Keep it here on Channel 16, Plum TV.